In your view, is what Israel is doing in Gaza a genocide?
In my view, it is absolutely disgraceful, horrible, and I'm doing, as a United States Senator, everything I can to end it. I do not want to see the United States complicit in what Netanyahu and his right-wing lunatic friends are doing right now to the Palestinian people.
Now, that was from this past February. And that, I guess we were somewhere around a half year or so into the Israeli war against Hamas. And that was a pretty risky statement at the time. And he got a lot of heat for that because everyone in the United States and certainly all the Western media was focused very sharply on October 7th, as though history began on that day, and that just came out of nowhere, and there's no reason for it. And so Israel had every right to go and defend itself, which, by the way, Senator Sanders has repeated on numerous occasions, to include just earlier this afternoon on a new op-ed he's got, which we'll talk about shortly. But we want to talk right now about, is this a genocide or not? That's the question he was given in February. And we have really nobody better to talk about this than Professor Omer Bartov, who is the professor of Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Brown University and a former IDF officer. Professor, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me again.
Well, listen, these are some pretty charged issues here, and especially in the United States, there's lots of emotions attached to this because there's a lot of violently pro-Israeli folks, certainly a lot in the media that basically, don't look at anything in the world besides the Israeli position. There's a lot of other people who are looking at this from the Palestinian position and want to see, some kind of justice be brought into that. And these sides have been clashing in some cases quite significantly for a number of months now. Now, we had you on our show actually several times. I guess the first time was, I think, before the end of last year, because you had published a piece in the New York Times in which you said what I believe is a historian of genocide. And we wanted to see what you were thinking about that. And one of the things you wrote in there was, in justifying the assault, this is talking about the assault of the Israelis against Hamas in light of October 7th. Israeli leaders and generals have made terrifying pronouncements that indicate a genocidal intent. My greatest concern watching the Israeli-Gaza war unfold is that there is a genocidal intent which can easily tip into a genocidal action, which at the time you said that you were not sure yet that it had tipped over that threshold there. But you were at Georgetown here, not far from where I'm at. Actually, I wish I'd have known, because I'd have loved to have been in the audience. But you now say that maybe some things are different, because you, at least what was written about this is, you said, I wrote about this in August in The Guardian, and I said that I had changed my mind. And to me, this appears now as a genocidal operation. Why genocidal? Because it's making the entire area uninhabitable for the Palestinian population. I wonder if you could just kind of tell us, just generally, what changed from last November until this speech here.
Right. So, yeah, thanks for having me again. As you know, in November last year, I wrote, as you said, that there were certainly indications of war crimes and crimes against humanity by the IDF and genocidal expressions of intent by people with executive power in Israel already in October that year. That's over a year ago, but one could not yet make a direct connection between that and operations on the ground. And I started seeing increasing evidence of that happening. And for me, the sort of tilting point was in May. On May 8th, the IDF attacked the last remaining area that it hadn't entered yet in Rafah in southern Gaza, the southern part of the Gaza Strip, right next to the Egyptian border. And there were about 1 million displaced people there who had been displaced several times because the IDF told them to leave their homes for their own safety, because those areas would become operational areas. And it moved them one more time to the Mawasi area, which is a sort of beach area in southwestern Gaza without any infrastructure. And then he moved into Rafah, and as has been reported even recently now on Israeli TV, much of that city is completely destroyed. And so I started looking back at the pattern of IDF operations since the beginning. And what one can see is that there's been not only killing of large numbers of people, about 43,000 of whom at least 60% are civilians, of whom about half are children, over 100,000 wounded, and many other thousands under the debris, and many other thousands who died indirectly from not being able to receive any medical care. But there was also systematic destruction of universities, of houses, of places of worship, of museums, of any places of collective memory, public buildings, as well as residences and infrastructure. So that what has happened, even until May, June, was a systematic destruction of areas from which the civilians had been moved out, Palestinian civilians had been moved out, making it impossible for them to come back, and if they were ever to come back, to live there. And if they were ever able to live there, taking away from them everything that facilitates their existence as a group, as a cultural group. If you destroy all your cultural, educational, health institutions, a group cannot survive as such. So it appeared by then that the intent was to make the whole area uninhabitable for Palestinians, which would come under the definition of genocide. Now,
and actually, that's a really important point I want to bring up, because you keep talking about the many times you've been on our show, you always stick to like, what is the actual legal definition of that? And we actually have that. Gary, if you can toss that up on the screen. The United Nations defines genocide as an act committed with the intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. Perpetrators of genocide may try to accomplish this by killing or deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. Is this what you have in mind when you're looking at the physical evidence?
Precisely. That's precisely it. And that's exactly what I cited in the article that came out in The Guardian in August. But I would add that since then, in early October, this last October, so a year after the beginning of the war, the IDF started implementing a plan that was being sold on the Israeli media by a retired Israeli general, Giora Eiland, who was saying that Israel should empty the top third of the Gaza Strip north of the so-called Netzarim corridor of its population entirely, and to do it by military action, by giving the civilians there a deadline to leave, and then depriving them of any supplies of food, so threatening them with famine. And the IDF, as of early October, initially without admitting that it was doing it, and now there's more and more information also coming from people on the ground, from the army on the ground, is doing exactly that. That is, even within the framework of that genocidal operation, it is now carrying out a very clearly defined operation in northern Gaza to move all the population out. The Netzarim corridor now is several miles wide. It's not just a road. It's an entire section that's been totally flattened. That area itself has been cut up into sectors which are being emptied one after the other, and all the buildings there are being destroyed. Similarly, this is happening also in the south, in Rafah, north of the Philadelphia corridor, which has also been widened. So what you're seeing there, first of all, is systematic destruction. This appears to be part of a larger plan. There are already settlers waiting on the other side of the border to move into the northern part of Gaza after it's completely emptied and begin settling it. And the last thing I would say is that we are speaking about a war in Gaza, but in fact, there is no war in Gaza anymore. Hamas is no longer operating as an organized military. There are obviously guerrillas here and there. There are guerrilla attacks. Israeli soldiers are getting killed. But by and large, now the army is in complete control of the whole area. And what it is engaged in is in destroying that area and make it possible for whatever would happen next, since the government has no intention of allowing any Palestinian authority to take over. It would be, and the army has been saying that, under occupation at least until the end of 2025, by which time it appears much of the place, already there's been huge destruction, but would have been totally flattened. And it's not entirely clear what would happen to the population that is being increasingly squeezed into this small area in the southwestern part of the Gaza Strip.
Now, when a lot of the times I've seen when some of the Israeli leaders or official spokesmen are asked about these kind of things, when you just see video like we're showing right now, they always say, hey, well, that is the fault of Hamas. They are hiding in the basements. They're using them as human shield. And we have to go in and do this because otherwise we won't be able to ever win the war. And what do you say to those kind of statements?
It's simply not true. I mean, I'm not happy to say that, but it's simply not true. There is systematic destruction. Even on Israeli TV a couple of days ago, interestingly, although Israeli TV never shows Palestinian dead and wounded and the horrible damage that is being done to civilians, there was an interview with a battalion commander in Rafah on the Philadelphia corridor. And he was saying, we are taking these buildings down simply because we want to have complete view of the area. This building is in our way. We're not destroying it because there are any combatants in it. We just want to have an open view of the territory. And they're doing that by widening these corridors, including, of course, a separation area that goes around the entire Gaza Strip, separating between the Strip and Israeli areas, and then the corridors that are being widened all the time. So this is no longer a matter of using rather brutal tactics of for built-up areas warfare, but rather simply systematically destroying houses with the intent of never allowing the population to come back there. And people in northern Gaza have been told, you are not coming back. This is over. And so we are really not talking anymore about anything that has to do with the military operation, but rather the realization of a plan, parts of which have been aired quite widely in Israel, of making the whole area, or at least large parts of the area, bit by bit, uninhabitable for Palestinians, and then the army taking it over entirely, and they will be followed by settlers.
Wow, that's really a significant change, I think, and it's kind of been under the radar because all the radar in the West has been focused in the north, in Lebanon, and further north, potentially in Iran, and everything's kind of been focused on that, and there's been a whole lot less scrutiny on the Gaza Strip itself. But what you're saying is that those actions have changed, and yet they have continued on with the destruction. I'm wondering what within Israel, what is this doing to within Israeli society? As I understand it, there's one component that is completely for this and is advocating of this. It's not only not embarrassed by it, but advocates continued on. But then there's another element that is opposed to this, etc. How would you characterize what's going on within Israeli society?
So first of all, I'll just say one indication of exactly what you're saying is there's only one division now operating in the Gaza Strip and 3 divisions in Lebanon. So most of the fighting and the weight of the military is now in the north, where, by the way, there's also systematic destruction. The entire area of villages just north of the Israeli-Lebanese border, the first line of offense by the IDF, these villages have been blown up. They've been destroyed. And now the IDF has moved into a second strip, and it's doing the same thing. It's destroying village by village, arguing that in every house in those villages, there is some kind of armaments of Hezbollah. And so village by village is being blown up. So that's just in terms of, and they're still fighting, although Hezbollah has been weakened. As for the Israeli public, so I'd say this, first of all, when the IDF went to ground attack in Lebanon, there was a lot of support for that. And Netanyahu's ratings, which are very low, rose because of that. And the reason for that is that the northern part of Israel has been under rocket attack by Hezbollah from the very beginning, and it's been evacuated. So there's tens of thousands of Israelis getting very little support from their own government, who are living in one-room hotels in all kinds of places. They cannot live in their own homes. Their children cannot go to school. Their homes have been destroyed. These rockets have wreaked huge devastation there, and they're now heading south. They've been attacking Haifa. Today, there were rockets falling in the Tel Aviv area. And so people supported the army to go in there and finish that business. So there's not much focus anymore on Gaza. The only thing is that there's still hostages there. There are about 101 hostages, maybe half of them are still alive. So this is tearing Israeli society apart, because there's a sense that Israeli hostages, civilians, old people, there's a baby there, if that baby is still alive, young women have been kept there for over a year, and it's clear that the government is doing nothing to free them. In fact, it has no interest in doing so. And more information has come out that Netanyahu has actually made sure that any deal that might have been struck with Hamas was somehow torpedoed. So it never happened. This is tearing Israeli society apart, because there's a sense of a lack of social solidarity, lack of trust in the government, lack of trust in the military. But the fighting itself in Lebanon is supported, and there is ongoing indifference, complete indifference, I would say, by the Israeli public, including the fiercest opponents of Netanyahu, as for the fate of Palestinians. There's hardly any talk about it. It's not covered by the media. And when it comes up only as what the enemy might say or what the critics of Israel might say. But there's no sense of empathy whatsoever for tens of thousands of Palestinian losses.
And what do you make of that headline that Gary's showing there? That's from today, where Netanyahu is saying, no, we'll bring back our scores of hostages, maybe even soon. He's obviously been saying similar things, but is there some element of the population in Israel that still believes that?
No, there's no one. This is just empty words. And, Netanyahu also speaks from both sides of his mouth in Hebrew and in English. I mean, what he says in Hebrew and what he says in English he gives major interviews only in English, hardly ever in Hebrew. And no one has any trust in him, not in what he promises and not as a leader. The problem is that there is no alternative in Israel right now. The opposition is very weak, and by and large, although it may be a bit less corrupt than Netanyahu, is towing the same line, including the head of what is now the newly reconstituted left-wing party is talking about occupation of parts of southern Lebanon. So there is no real opposition to Netanyahu. Nobody trusts him. I would say that is the main issue in Israel. There is a sense of confusion, of insecurity. One has to remember that we have reservists in Israel. Much of the army is made of reservists some have been serving as long as 300 days. They have lost their businesses, they've lost their jobs, their families are broken. They don't know what to come back to, and they don't really expect the government to help them in that. So there is a creeping demoralization of the military, especially of the reservists. There is information of people refusing to go back to service after they come back home. So in the long run, of course, this is not sustainable, but it doesn't congeal into any real opposition to Netanyahu, because there's nobody to carry that politically.
I see. And I'm curious, so you're taking a pretty bold stand, especially for an Israeli person who fought in the IDF, and you've been in some of these areas before. What kind of reaction and response do you get from some of those on the side of this, on the Netanyahu side, I suppose?
Yeah, I don't know what they think about what I'm saying. They're not communicating with me, thankfully. I will be in Israel in 2 weeks, so for another visit. So I'll see what it's like. But I would say that part of what I wrote about in the essay that came out in The Guardian in August was that some people that I know well, who are liberal, open-minded, cosmopolitan, have traveled, know languages, they seem to me to be in a kind of state of shock since October 7th. And I had a feeling that they simply did not want to talk about what was being done in their name, sometimes by their own children, in Gaza. And they had become paralyzed. They'd become paralyzed morally, emotionally. And I found that very troubling, I have to say, very, very difficult. As for people on the right, I gave a lecture there, I tried to give a lecture, which was disrupted by students who had come back from reserve service, and they were vehemently against any accusations that Israel was unjust in its war. They felt that they were doing the right thing. And I think that's a prevalent sentiment in Israel, especially in the younger cohorts. Even people that I know, their children are more to the right wing than they are, and more gung-ho about finishing the job, whatever that might mean.
Yeah, we're gonna get into that here in just a little bit, but I did want to talk about, because there are other voices that are basically saying the same thing that you are. One of which, as we showed on our opening, is Senator Bernie Sanders. Well, it turns out that I think less than an hour before we came on air here, he published a piece in the Washington Post in which he says no more arms for Netanyahu. In it, he wrote, "As I've said many times, Israel clearly had a right to respond to the horrific Hamas terrorist attack on October 7, 2023. But Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's extremist government has not simply waged war against Hamas, it has also waged all-out war against the Palestinian people." He went on to say, and that, Gary, if you can toss that second one up there, he also went in there to actually say the United States is also not without culpability, because he wrote, Gary, if you can toss that one up. Guess it's coming in just a second. Sorry about that. There he goes. He said the United States has provided $18 billion in military aid to Israel and delivered more than 50,000 tons of armaments and military equipment. As Americans, we are complicit in these horrific and illegal atrocities. Do you agree with him on that, or is that too harsh?
No, Bernie Sanders is absolutely right. I'm glad that he's finally come out and said it explicitly. I met a few weeks ago with some activists, with Senator Ed Markey from Massachusetts, and we asked him also to come up with a statement. Senator Warren from Massachusetts did speak out, and we're expecting that they will try to pass a resolution. Obviously, they won't have a majority, but at least a resolution to that effect, because the United States, I'm really sad to say this, but the United States under President Biden is now complicit in the killing of tens of thousands of civilians and in facilitating Israel's genocidal campaign in Gaza. And the thing is, not only that the U.S. is supplying Israel with arms, but precisely for that reason, the United States could have stopped it. It could have stopped it already in November, when I published that op-ed last year, or in December. Any American administration today that says to Israel, you have 2 weeks to wrap this up, and after that, if you don't stop firing, we're not supplying you either with munitions or with political cover in the Security Council. And the whole thing would have ground to a halt. The IDF cannot fight for more than 3 weeks without a constant supply of arms coming from the United States. And not having done so, quite apart from the damage that it did, obviously, to this administration and for domestic politics in the election campaign, also made all American taxpayers complicit in a completely indefensible operation, which, by the way, also means a shattering of the entire regime of international law that was put into place in the wake of World War II and the Holocaust. Israel is in breach of all international agreements on war crimes, on crimes against humanity, and genocide, and is acting with total impunity because the United States allows it to do so.
Now, so far, when you look at any of the major network television stations, whether that's the majors like ABC, NBC, et cetera, or Fox, CNN, MSNBC, et cetera, all those, you see nearly consistent across the board a very, very much pro-Israeli view, and you see this nonstop parade of Israeli spokesmen to come on, and they say, you know, we're just defending ourselves here. This is the right thing to do. Nobody, the UN Charter, 51 says that we can defend ourselves, and nobody can deny us that. And then nobody ever looks underneath the curtain, so to speak, at what they mean when they say defend themselves. But you taking your political life into your hands if you say anything besides something pro-Israel. And I wonder what your thoughts are when you see those kinds of things, and the harm that I think that it's actually even doing to Israel itself, and it's undermining its long-term viability and certainly support around the world. How do you see that?
So first of all, it is a very sad sight to see how mainstream American media and much of European mainstream media telling only the Israeli side of the story and are not being critical about Israeli actions, and rarely get to report from the ground and to see what is going on there. Admittedly, it's also extremely dangerous. The one network that reports from Gaza, Al Jazeera, has seen scores of its journalists killed, and in a number of cases, at least, targeted by the IDF. So it is a very sad sight. It's very hard for American and European publics to understand what is going on because of this. And as you say, I think correctly, this ultimately harms everyone. It harms American national interests. It harms European national interests. It obviously causes death and devastation on a vast scale to Palestinians. It's also, in the long run, is already weakening Israel day by day. Israel is not getting stronger, it's getting weaker. It's getting weaker economically. The economy is devastated in Israel, and it'll get much worse now. Morally, the domestic politics in Israel has frayed, and militarily, and ultimately, of course, within the international arena. And when we think about the future of this, with a new American administration coming in, which may well allow Israel to annex some of the occupied territories, the facade of occupation will disappear, and Israel will become de jure an apartheid state, because it is not going to give citizenship to Palestinians who would become now, if Israel annexes the West Bank, would not be allowed to become Israeli citizens, and therefore would be living without any rights in a state not under occupation. This will make Israel, in the long run, a pariah state.
And in fact, I want to look. There's a couple things, Gary. If you could pull back up that clip we used on Huckabee a few days back. If let me know if you can find that one. But in the meantime, I want to show you. It's for people who may think, well, the new incoming administration may have a good idea. Maybe they'll change some things. Well, here is the Secretary of State designate Marco Rubio talking about the war just before he was actually nominated for this position.
There are 60,000 Israelis right now who, for almost a year now, have had to leave their homes in northern Israel and are living in hotels in Tel Aviv, and their kids are going to school online in conference rooms because the group that Nasrallah headed, which is Hezbollah, was using anti-tank weapons, not guided long-range missiles, anti-tank weapons to target them and civilian infrastructure, so people had to leave. What country can have 60,000 people permanently displaced? And that's what this issue with Hezbollah is all about. Israel wants a 6 to 10 mile buffer between itself and Hezbollah, so they can't be using these shoulder-fired rockets to target cities and civilian communities so people can move back to their homes. And Hezbollah refuses to pull back. It continues with those attacks. And so Israel has no choice but to defend itself. And so wiping out not just Nasrallah, but the senior leadership of this evil organization, I think is a service to humanity.
And you could hear laced throughout that entire description right there, there is one view and one view only, and that is the Israeli perception of how things are, and literally did not even mention a word about anybody living in the Gaza Strip or anybody in the West Bank or even the people in Lebanon for that matter. It's everything is characterized as really what the official Israeli positions are. He's just mimicking those. So if you're thinking there's going to be a change of possibility there when the Trump administration comes in, it seems unlikely.
Yeah, it seems unlikely. In truth, I think none of us knows what Trump is going to do. I'm not sure he knows himself. So it's the only positive aspect of this that I can see is that whereas Biden and Blinken got no attention whatsoever from Netanyahu, he kept doing whatever he wanted to do because they promised to help him, and whatever criticism they directed his way had no impact whatsoever. It didn't change. I think Netanyahu is, like many other people around the world, is scared of Trump, and he doesn't know what Trump will do. And now it may be very much in Israel's favor, which is likely, but we can't quite tell. I think my own prediction is that Trump will want to put an end to this because it's a huge waste of money, as Bernie Sanders was writing. It's at least $18 billion that have gone to fund this war, and what has been accomplished with that? Just massive destruction and no resolution of anything at all. So it's possible that he would want to put an end to it, but to what end? What will be that end? And that's unclear.
Then what is troubling is it may be unclear, but there are some evidence that it could go in a direction that's negative that you actually talked about just a second ago, and that is the potential for annexation in the West Bank and in Gaza and possibly even in southern Lebanon. Now, that's doubly problematic when you take a look at Mike Huckabee, who has been listed as the designee for ambassador of the United States to Israel. Because here's what he said about his description of the West Bank in 2017.
Israel would only be acting on the property it already owns. I think Israel has title deed to Judea and Samaria. There are certain words I refuse to use. There is no such thing as a West Bank. It's Judea and Samaria. There's no such thing as a settlement. They're communities, they're neighborhoods, they're cities. There's no such thing as an occupation.
And he went on to also say there's no such thing as a Palestinian, by the way. Right. So if that is the guy's mindset, and it seems unlikely that it's changed any in the years since that time, not very many years, if that's going to be your ambassador, is that a signal to Netanyahu?
Yes, I think if Israel follows Huckabee, and if Trump adopts this view, it's possible that Israel won't have the kind of settlement with Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states that Trump and then Biden tried to bring about. But what will occur will be a fully blown apartheid state. And Israel, with American support, can do that. It can annex the West Bank. It can annex the Gaza Strip. I think that will ruin its relations with Arab countries that it already has peace with, such as Jordan and Egypt. And it will weaken it in the long run. One has to understand, and people like Huckabee are not interested in that because he has his own religious viewpoint and distorted history. But one has to understand that there are 7 million Jews and 7 million Palestinians living between the Jordan and the sea. And the question is, are they going to share their place? Are they going to keep killing each other? Or are you simply going to put half of the population under Israeli control as a population with no rights for the foreseeable future? with an attempt, which is ongoing now, not only in Gaza, but also in the West Bank, to push them out, to make it impossible for them to leave, to live there, and to make forcing them to leave, to go to, as they say in Israel, there's many other countries in the Arab world that they can live in. So to leave their homes in the field.
I actually wanted to ask you that question. So in the Gaza Strip, there was, I think it was 2.1, 2.3 million people there pre-war, et cetera. So that was confined within basically the fence that made up the Gaza Strip. But there are, correct me if I'm wrong, somewhere around 5 million Palestinians living throughout the West Bank area there, et cetera. And while then you had in some regards, the convenient situation of October 7th for the Israeli Defense Forces to go in there and start this wanton destruction. No such pretext exists in the more than double the size, population-wise, in the West Bank. How would even the proponents of this within Israel, how would they go about doing this when they can't? I mean, what would they do? Would they just go in and start moving people out with no pretext? I mean, how would that work?
So first of all, yeah, there are about 3 million Palestinians in the West Bank, just over 2 million in Gaza, and 2 million who are Palestinians who are Israeli citizens. And each group lives under different conditions. Israel has already started using the same tactics that it has used in Gaza in the West Bank, tactics that it hasn't used before, such as drones and jet attacks against Palestinian cities in the occupied West Bank. Why are they doing it? Well, they are saying that, as they say in Gaza now, they're Hamas operatives there. They have to uproot them. So the daily raids by the Israeli military and Israeli police into numerous towns and villages in the West Bank, hundreds have been killed already. But there's also ongoing ethnic cleansing. And this is being carried out by settlers who are assisted by the military, which is supposed to protect, of course, the population there. And then a part of the military there are settlers who've been put into uniform. So they're basically all working together. And there's scores now of Palestinian communities, more remote communities, where the settlers came and told them, if you don't leave by tomorrow, we're going to kill you. And so those areas have already been taken over. So this is something that began before October 7th, by the way. It began already as this government came into power. There was increasing, so in early 2023, there was increasing violence against Palestinians in the West Bank. And that, of course, has greatly accelerated. Now, there's also growing violence within communities of Palestinians who are Israeli citizens. The police is doing nothing about rising crime rate there because the police has just distanced itself from those people altogether. Although they're Israeli citizens, they live under major restrictions in Israel. They're not full citizens. They are second-rate citizens in terms of where they can live, what sort of social services they get, where they can expand their towns to or villages to. And so there's pressure on that population too, making it increasingly difficult for those people to live there. And there is a wave of younger Palestinians who are Israeli citizens who see no future in that state and are heading to other countries, which is precisely what the Israeli government wants to occur.
Now, let me ask you how that is being seen in the region. I mean, it seems like that the animosity and the anger against Israel is rising region-wide. And I wonder, let's look at a couple of things specifically. What do you make of this seemingly growing coordination between what was the animosity between the Saudi Arabia and Iran? They seem to be getting closer and closer together, not further apart.
So look, I mean, I think that the context for much of what we've seen happening was that on the one hand, most Arab Sunni countries actually wanted to have a deal with Israel before October 7th. Because they wanted better contacts with the United States. They were happy to have better contacts with Israel. And they saw Iran as a threat. And the idea was to open a trade route also to India and so forth. Obviously, October 7th changed that. The problem, even before October 7th, was what to do with the Palestinians. And Saudi Arabia was saying, well, we have to find something to do with that issue. We can't, because these are regimes that are worried about their own populations. They're authoritarian regimes. They know there's a lot of popular support for the Palestinians. They themselves don't care very much, but they have to pay attention to their population. Now, after October 7th, that became much more complicated. However, I think that there is still a will among Sunni Arab states to put an end to all this and to go back to the way things were before, as long as the Palestinian issue is resolved. Yes, there is worry about Iran, and yes, now the Saudis, seeing that things are not moving anywhere positive for them vis-a-vis Israel, are trying to make sure that they are okay with Iran, that there's some negotiations with Iran as well. But by and large, one has to understand, and that too has been completely distorted, Iran wants to project power, yes, but Iran is not a country that wants to go to war with Israel, and certainly not with the United States. It wants to ensure its own power position in the Middle East. This idea that Netanyahu has been selling to his own public and to the American public, that Iran is this great devil that wants to destroy the state of Israel, there's no proof of that whatsoever. It does want to project power. It does want to make sure that it's influential in the region, but it's shown over and over again that it would rather have a balance of power than a destructive war.
And what about the kind of in a different area, but still related, this recent breaking of diplomatic relations between Turkey and Israel? Is that a significant issue, or is it less important than you may think?
Well, Turkey has been playing this game for a long time. It breaks off diplomatic relations, and then you realize that there's all kind of deals under the table, all kind of commercial contacts. So Turkey also, sadly under Erdogan, has tried to project its own influence in the territories of the former Ottoman Empire and to present itself as a sort of power broker there. And it has been very uncomfortable with what Israel is doing. And apparently now it has started hosting Hamas again because Hamas is being kicked out of Qatar. But I wouldn't, again, Turkey is not a country that's going to go to war with Israel. It's trying to show that its sentiments are with the Palestinians and with the Arabs. And at the same time, it wants to have decent relations with Israel and the United States. And it's a member of NATO, after all, as well.
And I guess lastly, so we can kind of wrap this up, what do you think, where is this going to go when the Trump administration comes in? Because as you pointed out a second ago, this really can't go on forever like this. Even if Trump comes in and says, yeah, here's a blank check, do whatever you want to do, we'll keep sending you the weapons and whatever. But I mean, unless you find some way to get a big bulldozer and literally move 5-7 million people out of their territory, this can't go on like this. And as you said, the economic issues are also an issue. Where do you see this going?
So I think that now I'm a historian and I'm thinking about the future. So take it with a grain of salt. My sense is that Trump will give Netanyahu a deadline to wrap things up. He's already said that, do whatever you need to do, but finish it. Hopefully he thinks even before he comes in. Now, how will that finish? I think that in Lebanon, everybody has an interest in stopping this. It's ruining Lebanon. There's a danger of a civil war in Lebanon. Nobody wants that. There's been massive destruction in southern Lebanon, as I said, and Israel has no interest in continuing that. The problem for the Israeli government is to get the population to come back to their homes, and they won't come back unless they are assured that they won't be rained with rockets again. So, but I think an agreement is probably quite near. With the Palestinians in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, I think that as long as Israel projects its total control of it, Trump won't care at all. So, as I say, I think it will evolve into a kind of apartheid-like state, and Israel will become itself increasingly authoritarian, increasingly violent inside, and that will continue long after Trump is not a president any longer. And he will be one of the signatories on that direction, which began, unfortunately, under Biden.
And and if I could just add one final part to that, if one can argue that the explosion of October 7th, 2023 was because of what had happened, not just in the decades prior, but even the summer prior, where the pressures were building up in light of the fact that the Gaza Strip is being made unlivable and now increasing parts of the West Bank, even if Israel gets to this point to where it's militarily dominant, how long would it be before that pressure starts building back up again?
Yeah, so I don't think that this will be a viable situation for Israel. The question is, how long will it take? Because I think if that dire future actually occurs of a kind of apartheid state, it will lose support from the international community, from its European allies. Support in the United States will diminish. It will no longer be able to sell itself as the only democracy in the Middle East, because it will not be one. The IDF will not be seen by anyone as the most moral army in the world. And so it will become increasingly impoverished, increasingly isolated. It will become a pariah state. And eventually, seeing that half of its population will be Arabs living, Palestinians living under oppression, it will implode in one way or another. But I think it could take a decade or two.
Well, that's not a very appealing situation, especially for the Palestinian people. But listen, we are grateful that you've come back on today and given us a no kidding. This is an honest look at what's actually happening on the ground right now. And we'd also invite you back once you come back from Israel. You said after your next trip in a couple of weeks, we'd really like to have you back on to give us some fresh perspective from the ground. So thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And we appreciate you guys for coming on to us today. I know this is a kind of a tough subject here, but we're always unintimidated and uncompromised to tell you the truth, no matter what it is, no matter who likes it or doesn't like it. You deserve to know the truth, and you can count on Daniel Davis Deep Dive to keep giving it to you. Thank you very much, and we'll see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.